Okay, we're going to do a video here on how to make some paper snowflakes. So, we are going to be using these in class for our class project. First, we're going to start with our computer paper, just normal printer paper or computer paper, and we're going to fold it in half. So, we're folding it in half. And then we're going to cut it in half because we're going to make snowflakes that are a little bit smaller than we would get if we used the full sheet. All right. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn this smaller rectangle on its side, take the corner, and line this up so that the flat side meets the flat side of the top. And I'm just going to fold that down to make a triangle. So that would be a right triangle. And we're just doing that in order to make a square. So I'm going to cut this off. Right, so anytime you have a rectangular sheet of paper, if you need to make it square, you can use that trick in order to make a rectangle into a square. All right, I'm going to make 2 snowflakes of 2 different sizes, or more if you want to. So I'm going to take this smaller rectangle, and I'm going to do the same thing. So this corner goes up, and I line this side up with this side. Okay. So I made my triangle, and then I'm just cutting along that edge, and I unfold it, and I've got a smaller square. And then finally, if I want to make 3 of these of different sizes, I can go ahead and do the same thing to that piece of scrap paper. So I folded it into a triangle, and then I'm cutting off the edge. If I wanted to, I could keep going. Right, and I've got some extra paper over here. So the process of cutting the snowflake, I'm going to go ahead and start with this first one. I've already folded it once in half, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do that again. Okay. Then I'm going to go ahead and fold it again in half. And every time I do that, I'm going to make some sharp corners, sharp edges, I should say, sharp creases. All right, so I'm just creasing that with my nails, or I could use the side of my scissors to help make that a nice sharp crease. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fold it one more time. And if it's too hard to cut, you could even skip that last fold. You could even do your cutting from this stage if you want. All right, so now notice how I just opened that and just closed it. This part right here, this end, that would be the center of my square if I unfolded it. So right here, this end that I'm holding is the center. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take a pencil. Once you get good at these, you don't need a pencil, but just to make this clear, I'm going to draw out where I'm going to make my cuts. So I recommend doing one in this pointy area. All right, if I make my shapes so that they have straight lines on them, it's going to be a little bit easier. I'm just going to zoom in so that you guys can see this a little bit more clearly. now you can see a little bit more easily how I made that shape. Right? And this could be different. You could just do just one straight line there. Right? And I'm just going to make that sort of lightly shaded or marked so you can see where I'm going to cut out. So I'll go ahead and I'll do that first. So I cut that out. So I'm going to show you what that's going to look like. You don't need to unfold yours. But you can see how any cut that I make gets repeated on the different sides because it's folded. All right, so as I'm making different cuts, I can't have them touch each other or the whole thing will fall apart. So again, this is my center. I'm going to go ahead and make some cuts along this edge to change the shape. So instead of just being a boring square, it's going to be more interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and, let's see, we'll do maybe something like that. And you can really do any shapes that you want. So I was just kind of changing my mind here as I was going. So this will be the area that I'm going to cut out. All right, so I did my first shape and my second shape. Now, I can make some shapes on this side and this side. So this, again, this would be my center, and this is my outside edge. So you can see that now the shape has gone from just a boring square to a prettier kind of shape. All right, now I'm going to make some shapes I'm going to cut out from this side and this side. So we don't have to do anything that complicated. I am going to go ahead and I'm going to make some shapes kind of connecting over here just to make ones that are more intricate. All right. If I make this shape touching another shape up here, then they're going to kind of join together. The holes would join together. So I could do that, but if I want to keep them separate, then I won't. So you do not have to make your shapes exactly the same as my shapes in any way. So trying to keep these somewhat simple. Right? And I don't have to cut all of this out at once. So I could just do this simple triangle. And then I can do these two smaller ones. So those do join up to make one shape. And then over here, again, I can just cut part of this out at a time in order to make it a little bit simpler to cut. So when I did one shape and then I'm adding on to it, it's really just making one larger shape. So maybe, in fact, I'll simplify that a little bit. Okay, so that's what I have so far. You can see how, as I unfold it, it's going to make some interesting shapes. So now I'm going to do some shapes on this side. Okay. So if I want to make these go further into the center, I can. So see how I'm adding one shape onto the other shape? Now what would become a problem would be if these shapes touch the ones that I already made on that side, because then what would happen would be I would just be cutting right through the snowflake. So we don't want any of our shapes on this side to touch any of the ones over here, or this one in the center either. The more of the snowflake that I cut out, the more kind of intricate this snowflake will look in the end. Okay, so just all kind of pretty simple, pretty basic triangles. So I'm just going to cut out all those shapes that I made. Oops. So starting with that first shape. You see how I attached that one to that one, so I can go ahead and I can going. And so as this is getting a little more intricate, we've got less and less paper, so you just have to be careful. Okay. And then the rest of these are just very simple. And you can make any shapes that you want in your own snowflakes. So you can make curves. They're a little bit harder to cut, but you can do it. So just anything you make will end up looking pretty cool on the snowflake. So you can make it as complicated or as simple as you want. So that's all the cutting I'm going to do. Now I'm going to go ahead and unfold it. So there's my snowflake, and what we'll be doing is using these to make texture rubbings. So I'm going to take this earlier, this half of the piece of paper, and I can actually use that to do my first texture rubbing. So this should fit under here pretty much just perfectly, since those were the same size. I've got my crayon over here that I've peeled off the paper, and then I put my snowflake underneath, and I'm using the side of the crayon, and I'm rubbing. So if you're just making paper snowflakes, you don't need to do this part, but for our class project, we'll be using these paper snowflakes to create this texture rubbing for the background of our portraits. So my Art 1 class, you guys are doing these snowflakes and then also doing the texture rubbing as part of your homework, so that when you come into class, you will have all of the pieces of our portrait backgrounds, and we'll just use some glue and put them all together. So you don't have to use that other half. It's a little bit hard for me to kind of hold this down. It's a little bit small to hold down this paper, so feel free to use a full-size sheet of printer paper to do your rubbing on top of if you would like. So the first time you do one, if you haven't done too many texture rubbings, it might come out a little wonky, but hopefully with some practice you'll get that. So there's my snowflake underneath, safe and sound. In order to use this for our class project, I can cut this out. I can just cut it out like a basic square. Or if I want to, I could get a little bit more intricate and cut into all of those parts in there. So that's what we'll be doing for class. So you'll be cutting these out as part of your homework. All right, so now we know our basic technique for doing our snowflakes. We're going to do one or two more of these. So here are my pieces of square scrap paper that I made in my first step. So I'm going to make a medium-sized snowflake. I folded it in half. Then I folded it in half again. And I can fold it in half one more time. And again, you don't really even have to do this final fold if it's too difficult to cut. Okay. If you're pretty good at these snowflakes, you don't even have to draw your shapes out, but I can if I want to. Remember, this is the edge here. That is the center, so I like to always start with that. Don't even have to make this complicated. I can just do something as simple as that. Okay. On my outer edge, maybe I'll do something a little different this time. All right, so that's the shape I'm going to make up there. All right, and you guys can do whatever shapes you want. Right, and then finally, I will do a shape or two or more on each of these sides. But notice I'm not letting this touch. So that shape in the center will not touch this one here. And this will not touch that. And then we're going to do one or two more shapes over here. And none of those are going to touch each other. So I'm just going to make these a little darker so you can see. So if you get confused, you just need to remember, this one's my center. This is my outer edge, and then these are the inside parts. So starting with my center, you don't have to plan out all of this at once. You can just do it one part at a time like we did in the first snowflake. So there's my center. Then I've got my outside edge. And notice, I'm not going to try to get that intricate part right away. Right. So if I want to get that intricate part, I can just cut right into the center of this part because it's going to get cut out anyway. So I'm essentially going to be doing this in two or more pieces. And then I'm going to do my ones on the side. So I've got just a simple, slightly curvy kind of triangle there. And then I've got this next shape here. And again, I can do this in multiple pieces, so I don't have to cut anything too tricky. I'm just doing that as one shape, and then we can do the other half of it. And then my final part over here, again, don't have to make this tricky. I can just do this in two parts. And then I'm all done. There's my snowflake. And then my final one, I'm going to, again, fold in half. Fold in half. For this one, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you how it would look if I want to do one with just just folding this in half twice. So our triangle is a little bit different. It's still a right triangle. This is my center. This is my outside edge. And these will be the middle. So I can still do that center part first. So I'm making these cuts maybe a little bit more complicated because having it not folded as many times means that things won't repeat as many times. So I have to do more of the work. This will be my outer edge. So notice I don't have to do anything to try to make this symmetrical because it is still folded twice. It's still going to end up being symmetrical. It's just the symmetry will be repeated not as often. So we'll see what that looks like when we unfold it. So notice if I have a more complicated shape, I can still do it a little bit at a time. And then any additional shapes on either side. So this, remember, we cut out already. So over here, though, we haven't. So I can make that cut. Those shapes. If I want to put something in the center, I would just attach it to one of these existing two shapes. But notice, I did not make this side touch anything over here. Then the whole thing would fall apart. So I've got my first shape. So see, there's a little bit of space between that shape and this one that was in the center. Over here. Now again, this side, these shapes cannot touch the ones that started on that side. And if I were to accidentally cut through all the way to the edge, again, this whole part would fall off. So we don't want to do that. So that was only folded 2 times. We'll see how it comes out. So there you go. So the symmetry is a little bit different, but still repeats. All right, and now I would be able to simply take my extra sheet of paper and I can do my rubbings with these. I'm going to zoom out. Okay, make sure I don't have any extra paper scraps under here. And I can put my snowflakes underneath here. I'm going to be cutting these out for the background we're going to be doing, so I don't really have to worry too much where they are. And as long as I have more printer paper, I can do as many of these as I want. you're trying to conserve paper, just put your snowflakes close to each other before you do the rubbings. So there's my rubbing number 1. I want to make sure I'm conserving paper. I could move this close to that one. Got to press nice and hard to make this work. And just use the side of the crayon, not the point. Much easier to use the side. Okay. There you have it. And so I would make a whole bunch more of those rubbings to fill up the background. And I'm cutting them out. My earlier one, I just cut it as a square. But these will also look really cool if you cut them out in a little more detail. Doesn't necessarily have to be all the detail. So there's my next snowflake cutout. So you guys who are using these for our Art 1 portrait backgrounds, you're going to keep going, and you're going to do 2 rubbings of each of these different size snowflakes and cut each one out. So then you will have 6 of these cut out snowflake rubbings total. All right. Have a great day.